Hello? Hello? Turn up the volume. Hello.
Hi, Amanda. This is Carrie. How are you?
Great. How are you? This is Amanda and Martha. How are you?
Amanda. Oh, good. Thank you. Are you guys on a speakerphone by any chance?
Yes.
Okay. That doesn't
no,
typically.
we're on a regular phone that has a speaker function.
Yes, but typically, in my experience, a speakerphone doesn't work very well.
What is the other one? Yeah, what's the other option with two of us?
Well, just, the hand, just, passing back and forth the handset. But we'll try it, and I'll just chat into you if it's a problem, if you're getting muddled or garbled. Sometimes that happens, okay?
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. Okay, good. Okay, we've got a big group, and we'll start right at noontime. So I'm gonna mute myself, and I think we're all set.
Pass the ball to me, or I pass it to myself?
No, I'll pass the ball to you.
Thank you.
And I'm gonna introduce you and just tell panelists about the chat feature and that sort of thing, and then we'll just go from there. And I just wanted to make sure we can distribute this to the participants afterwards. The PowerPoint, we'll make it into a PDF. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, perfect.
How many people do you have registered?
There are over 60 people registered.
Great.
And so I think you have somewhat of a mix between educators and parents, but a lot of educators, which is exciting. I'm thrilled. So anyways, great. Okay, all right, so I'm going to mute myself, but I'll be back on right at 12, and we'll get going.
All right, thanks.
All righty, take care.
You too.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the ARC of Massachusetts webinar series. And this afternoon's webinar is going to be on helping your child to lead, student-driven secondary transition. My name's Carrie Mahoney, and I'll be your moderator this afternoon. But before we start, let's just take a moment just to make sure everybody's ready. If you could just chat into me using the chat box on the bottom, on the right-hand side of your screen. Just chat in to me. I'm the host to make sure you can hear me okay. That would be awesome. You've all been muted upon entry, and that's to minimize background noise. This is a very large group, so I will probably keep you muted. If you do have questions, please just chat into us, and we'll either ask the question or you can, if you chat the question to all participants, and anybody will be able to see it. So we typically do take questions at the end and save about 10-15 minutes for that to happen. So anyways, let's see if there's anything else to tell you. If you're having any problems connecting, it's either audio or visually, it's always best just to log off and then reconnect. So anyways, I think that's it. So let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Amanda Green is the Secondary Transition Coordinator in the Office of Special Education Planning and Policy Development at the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Previously, she served as an information specialist and coordinator of the Massachusetts Association of Special Education Parent Advisory Councils, MASSPAC, at the Federation for Children with Special Needs. She's the mother of 3 sons, one of whom is 25 years old, has intellectual disabilities, and also lives his own life in New Haven, Connecticut. We also have Martha Daigle joining us as a presenter today, and Martha is the Family Engagement Coordinator in the Special Education Planning and Policy Office at the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Martha was a founder and co-director of an adult service agency that provides supports for adults in community-based programs. So we're thrilled to have all of you join us, and I'm going to pass the ball over to Amanda so that she can start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Welcome. This is Amanda Green.
Hi, and I'm Martha Daigle.
Over the next hour, Martha and I will offer an overview of the secondary transition process and some ways in which you, as a parent, can help your child to be a leader in his or her own transition process. For Massachusetts students receiving special education services, secondary transition is a time that begins when they turn 14 or earlier if the team agrees. From age 14 until they graduate or turn 22, students on IEPs receive transition services from their public school districts. We'll talk a lot more about transition services throughout this presentation, but just for a minute, let's think about the purpose of special education. Here's a thought from Dr. Michael Waymeyer from the University of Kansas.
Disability exists only in the gap between the individual's personal confidence and the demands of the environment. If we can close that gap, disability becomes irrelevant.
So, disability as a concept is environment dependent. For example, all humans are built to breathe air. If someone told us today that we'd have to live in the sea from now on, every one of us would have disabilities and need supports to be successful. So the degree to which your child has the skills to successfully navigate his or her environment is the degree to which disability plays a greater or lesser role in your child's life. This is what the special education process is all about, helping to close that gap. If you can picture, here's where your child is now with all of her strengths and challenges, and here's where she wants to go next year, in the next 5 years, in adult life. If we can help her build the skills year by year that she needs to meet the demands of that future environment, then disability becomes less and less significant, much less disabling. This is why it's so important to align transition goals and services between ages 14 and 22 to your child's vision for adult life. During the secondary transition years, we need to help your child build skills for the environment into which he or she will eventually find himself. As you know, special education is governed by laws at the federal and state level. Here is some of the federal language of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, regarding transition.
So transition services are a coordinated set of activities for a child with a disability that is designed to be within a results-oriented process that is focused on improving the academic and functional achievement of the child with a disability to facilitate the child's movement from school to post-school activities, including post-secondary education, vocational education, integrated employment, including supported employment, continuing in adult education, adult services, independent living, or community participation.
Note a few things. Note that transition services are supposed to be coordinated, so not haphazard or last minute, and they're supposed to produce results. And those results are the student's academic and functional achievement, so that the student can move from school to his or her future life in the worlds of education or training, employment, independent living, and community participation. Here's a visual way of thinking about secondary transition. On the left side is the student in school, and on the right is the student's adult life. Notice that the self-determined student on the left is at the center of the process. It's important that your child be the driver of his or her own transition process, especially as he or she gets older and closer to exiting high school. We realize that this may be a new thought and a change from the years when you spoke on behalf of your child nearly all the time. Why is it important that your child learn how to speak for him or herself? Research shows that students with disabilities who understand themselves, including their strengths and weaknesses, and who can share this information with others, and who understand how to seek and obtain assistance, will be the ones who achieve adult success. Also, students who are invested and involved in planning their own futures are more likely to do well in college, become employed, and participate in the community. For a really excellent resource that will help your child think about disability disclosure issues, see the 411 on disability disclosure. The link for that publication is going to be on slide 42 of this presentation coming up. Notice that in the student's outstretched hand on the left is a golden star. That star is your child's vision for the future, otherwise known as your child's post-secondary goals. We'll talk more about this a bit later. Your child's vision for future education or training, employment, independent living, and community participation guides the transition, planning, and services, and shapes the opportunities and experiences he or she has. That's the arrow in the center. Those opportunities and experiences lead to adult success on the right-hand side. You can see that the little star that was in the student's outstretched hand is now big.
So if you look back on the left-hand side of the model, the light blue ring shows that the student with disabilities is supported by the whole school transition assessment, the transition planning form, or TPF, and the IEP. The dark blue throughout the whole diagram is an infinity symbol. Because your child is supported in school by you, the family, by the community, and in some cases by state agencies. That support continues for the rest of the student's life, thus the infinity symbol. What is secondary transition? What is the purpose of secondary transition planning? Let's look at transition in the context of our state goal for all students. Special education law, supporting our children to be leaders, and parents' hopes and dreams for their children. Our goal is to prepare students with disabilities for a successful future aligns with our state goal to prepare all students for successful futures. The goal of Massachusetts public kindergarten through grade 12 education system is to prepare all students for success after high school.
That goal also aligns with one of the purposes of the IDEA, which is to ensure that students with disabilities are prepared for further education, employment, and independent living. It all fits together. In 2013, the Massachusetts Board of Higher Education and Board of Elementary and Secondary Education approved the state's college and career readiness definition. You can look at the whole definition at the link on this slide, and I urge you to do that. This research-based definition sets out what it means for all students, including students with disabilities, to be prepared for success in post-secondary education and the workplace. One of the notable things about this definition is that it talks about not only academic readiness, but also personal, social, and workplace readiness. If we look at these skills, the ability to direct and evaluate one's own learning, to be aware of and have the confidence to access resources to support learning in multiple contexts, the ability to interact with coworkers individually and in teams, motivation and initiative taking, flexibility, discipline, self-advocacy, and responsibility. We realize that we can think of these as self-determined behaviors. These are skills that all students should be working toward developing. Each student will develop these skills at his or her own pace and to his or her own level.
Let's pause for a minute to explain what we mean by the term self-determination. People who are self-determined know themselves. They know how to interact effectively with others and know how to purposely set goals and attain them. The transitioning student is working on developing these skills. It's an ongoing process. Students who are self-determined are causal agents in their own, they're not casual. They're causal agencies in their own life. What does this mean? It means that self-determined students can make good things happen for themselves. All people can be causal agencies in their own lives. Even your children with the most significant disabilities can express when they are hot or cold, happy or unhappy. You know because they let you know. Whether they're hungry, whether they are comfortable, whether there's too much noise, or too many strangers around. All behavior is communication. The way your child behaves will let you know what he or she wants. Depending on each young person's abilities and limitations, they can take more or less leadership in their own lives. Many of your children will be able to learn to take full responsibility for their adult lives.
Now let's break down the components of self-determination even further so we can really understand what it means. The ideas of internal locus of control and self-efficacy lay the groundwork for the development of other self-determination skills. These are the ideas that I am in charge of my own life, and I believe that I can successfully make things happen in my life. Sometimes students with disabilities are the beneficiaries of other people's best intentions. They are done to rather than doers, not given the opportunity to make choices or to say no, not afforded the opportunity to grow into leadership roles. Without experience having control over even small things in their own lives, young people can develop the belief that life is made up of events that just happen to them and over which they have no control. Dinner arrives on the table, clothing's laid out on the bed, cars and school buses appear, lessons and homework and grades just happen. I'm sure all of you know students like these. We know from research that students who do not have the belief that they can make a difference for themselves and others and who are not engaged in their own lives are more likely to drop out of school. Students whose no has never been accepted, as research has shown for those with intellectual disabilities, are people who are at risk and more vulnerable to becoming victims of crime, abuse, and neglect. Students who do not feel respected and heard are more likely to become frustrated and angry and more likely to exhibit negative behaviors.
Parents can help their children learn how to be self-determined by helping them make choices and decisions. What to wear, what to eat, when to play, when to work. One way you can help teach problem solving is by modeling how to solve problems with I wonder conversations, like, the vacuum cleaner is broken. I wonder how I can clean the rug. Or, the bus schedule says the bus should be here by now, but it's late. I wonder what I should do. Other skills young people need are the ability to adjust their own behavior depending on the situation, called self-regulation, the ability to speak and act on their own behalf, called self-advocacy, and self-awareness and self-knowledge.
A key idea that arose from the disability rights movement in the 1970s is dignity of risk. A person who is self-determined is one who has been afforded the respect that accompanies personhood, including the right to try and fail. Without the opportunity to experience both the positive and negative consequences of their decisions, young people have difficulty understanding the connection between their choices and the full range of possible outcomes. From the point of view of your child, life will just happen and maybe, somehow, turn out fine. This naive perspective does a disservice in the long run to our children, who will need to function as adults in the future worlds of post-secondary education, employment, and community life. We urge parents and schools to think how best to provide young people with developmentally appropriate, individualized opportunities to make choices and decisions, to say no and have that no respected, and to develop the belief that they themselves can make things happen. This is an important safety issue. I have a friend who used to make her young daughter, Kathy, who has intellectual disabilities, wear dresses, even though Kathy wanted to wear pants. A teacher pointed out one day that letting Kathy choose what to wear when she was young, in other words, respecting her no, would teach her that her no was worthy of respect. With practice saying no in this and in other ways, someday when Kathy grew up, she would understand she could make decisions about her own body and that it would be okay to say no to someone's unwanted sexual advances.
We believe that the gold standard for the way we treat people with disabilities is to consider how we treat a person who doesn't have disabilities. For example, how would a student without disabilities at any age work with peers on an assignment, choose what to wear or eat, take a public bus, use a cell phone, invite someone to a prom, make a purchase in a store, behave at work, select a course of study, or interact with an employer? Could a student with disabilities mentor a peer, lead a work group, sit on an advisory council, teach a skill to others, or run a meeting? If you have children who don't have disabilities, how would you support them to do these things? We encourage you to partner with educators and with your children to provide typical experiences that will allow each young person to build the skills that are necessary for adult life. You can play a powerful role in your child's education. The more experiences young people have, the more they can understand themselves, including their likes and dislikes. They can develop a bigger and more detailed vision. They grow in confidence. They acquire new skills and become known in your community. As parents, you can leverage the support networks around your community and at home so that your child will have experiences that will help them gain the skills they need to use in adulthood. Support can come from everywhere. Think about it, as from other parents, teachers, agencies, community organizations, friends, mentors, others, many others. So we're going to take a quick look, a flyover of key concepts and stages in the transition process. If you think back to the visual model, that students who are successful in life, and we know this from research, are self-determined students. In order to develop key self-determination skills, such as goal setting, motivation, persistence, social problem solving, and effective communication, it's important that students become informed about and involved in transition planning from a young age. Start early. Don't forget that if students are age 14 in middle school, they need to experience transition planning. Starting at age 14 is the law, and you'll see the link at the bottom of the page. Parents can help their children develop many skills that we use from life. Can your child describe his or her strengths or his or her learning style, or how his or her disability affects their learning, social experience, and community participation? Can your child describe his or her vision for the future? What can your child do independently? How independent is your child as a learner or with peers and social interactions? How independent is your child at home? And think about how your child receives instruction, right? How do they learn, and how do they engage in role play to enable him or her to actively participate and lead an IEP meeting?
So, as you remember from the visual model on slide 4, your child's vision for the future drives the secondary transition process. In her autobiography, My Beloved World, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor offers this insight about the importance of having a vision. Experience has taught me that you cannot value dreams according to the odds of their coming true. Their real value is in stirring within us the will to aspire. What a powerful statement. If you think about your own life, chances are that you are not doing today what you dreamed about doing when you were a child. But the dreams we have in childhood move us forward, keep us going. If our children have the will to aspire, they will continue to seek and to be persistent and to achieve. In Massachusetts, your child's vision is documented on 2 different forms, the Transition Planning Form, or TPF, and the IEP. The TPF is a flexible brainstorming tool that guides and documents the team's transition planning discussion before the team talks about the IEP. It informs IEP development, but is not part of the IEP. Instead, the action plan to be carried out by all kinds of people, the student, the family, coaches, employers, etc., is written on this form. This is a state-mandated form. In other words, the team is required to use it and to update it annually at the transition IEP meeting. But it is not part of the IEP, and nothing written on the TPF is legally required to occur. The TPF is different from the IEP, which is a legal document spelling out what the school will do. So to review this key point, the TPF allows the team to write down action steps for all kinds of different people. The IEP states only what the school will do. We often receive questions about how to use the TPF and the IEP together. So the team discusses and completes the TPF before completing the IEP form. The student's vision, which is also called postsecondary goals, from the TPF is then transferred directly to the vision statement on the IEP. The rest of the team may add their own thoughts to the vision statement when it's on the IEP if they want to. At the bottom of the front page of the TPF, you'll see the box where the team records the student's disability-related needs. The team lists those needs in the box and then uses this list to develop measurable annual IEP goals. There does not need to be a one-to-one correspondence between the disability-related needs and the annual goals on the IEP. You could list 1 or 2 or even 15 different needs, but you would never write 15 goals. An annual IEP goal should focus on building skills that will make the biggest difference to the student during that school year. Each year's annual goals build skills year after year that will promote the realization of the student's vision, AKA post-secondary goals. So elements from the action plan on the back of the TPF may be included in the IEP if the school district is responsible for them. As we said back on slide 4 when we discussed the transition visual model, your child's vision for adult life is also called post-secondary goals. This is a term that is used in IDEA, so it's important to understand what it means. Post-secondary goals are goals that a student hopes to achieve after leaving secondary school, in other words, high school. A truly individualized process uses post-secondary goals as the foundation for the development of the IEP, and I urge you to take a look at the advisory you can find at the link on this slide. Post-secondary goals are different from annual measurable IEP goals. Post-secondary goals are about the future after high school. Annual IEP goals describe the skills your child is building this year. IDEA says the IEP must have one measurable post-secondary goal in the area of education and training, one measurable post-secondary goal in the area of employment, and if appropriate, one measurable post-secondary goal in the area of independent living. You could argue it's appropriate for every student with an IEP to have an independent living goal, but that's up to the IEP team. For example, the vision statement could say, Joanna wants to become a chef, enroll in culinary school after high school, and live in an apartment with her friends. This would cover all 3 elements. Another example, Kendrick hopes to attend a 4-year college and become an attorney. This statement covers 2 elements, post-secondary education and employment.
Okay, so what do you do if your child has no idea what he or she wants to do? We hear that this is very common. Young people may not have a clear vision for their future. You can help your child by starting the conversation at age 14 or even earlier. Have conversations at home and in the community about your child's dreams, their strengths, interests, and challenges. Provide experiences over time which can help your child figure out what he or she likes and dislikes, is good at and is not so good at. If possible, walk down the main street in your town and use your community connections to help your child get jobs that will build employability skills and help them understand their own preferences. Visit local colleges, tour campuses, and talk to disability support offices. You can talk to your child about different kinds of jobs and what's required for each one. You can take your child to work with you for a visit. Students can volunteer places. There are many, many ways that you can help prepare your child, your son or daughter, for the future. To help your child appreciate all of their skills, accomplishments, and strengths, creating a portfolio, and you can use an online resource or make a paper copy, can be a very powerful tool. This portfolio can be adapted to show employers or to give a presentation at an IEP team meeting. Now, what if your child knows exactly what he or she wants to do, but you think it's pretty unrealistic? Again, we hear this question a lot. We encourage you to respect your child's vision and to remember the words of Sonia Sotomayor. Experience has taught me that you cannot value dreams according to the odds of their coming true. Their real value is in stirring within us the will to aspire. Young people need to have experiences to help them understand what their skills are as well as their likes and dislikes. This was probably true of most of you when you were a young person too. Your first job is probably not what you're doing today, but it probably taught you a lot about what you like to do for work, what you can do for work, and a lot about yourself. The more experiences and opportunities your children have, the more their visions will tend to align with their true interests and skills. Perhaps your child wants to be a doctor, but you think that's not realistic. Research with your child the kinds of classes he or she will need to take. Arrange for her to volunteer in a hospital or shadow a doctor. She will become more realistic as she understands what's involved in becoming a doctor. But if she's still interested in the medical field, try to figure out together what piece of the dream can come true. Can she be a nurse, an EMT, a certified nursing assistant? Can she do office work or be a receptionist in a doctor's office? Can she work in the hospital kitchen or deliver meals to patients?
Let's remember this linkage between the vision, otherwise known as post-secondary goals, and the annual IEP goals. So the team refers to the student's vision, post-secondary goals, and asks, what skills, strengths, interests, personal attributes, and accomplishments does the student currently have that will contribute to his or her post-secondary success? What skills and strengths will the student need to acquire in order to achieve his or her desired post-secondary outcomes? This slide is reminding us that we can refer back to the quote at the beginning from Dr. Michael Waymeyer, in which he talks about closing that gap, and that building skills to close that gap is the task that we're engaged in when we do the secondary transition work. But how does the team answer these questions? The answer is transition assessments. Transition assessments help us to do three things: discern your child's vision, understand his or her needs, strengths, preferences, and interests, and measure your child's current performance and progress toward the development of skills. Here's a good working definition of transition assessments: an ongoing process of collecting data on the individual's needs, strengths, preferences, and interests as they relate to the demands of current and future, there's that gap, current and future working, educational, living, and personal and social environments. Formal and informal assessment data serve as a common thread in the transition process and form the basis for defining goals and services to be included in the IEP. Note that transition assessment is not a one-and-done thing. It's ongoing. It gives us information about the student's current and future working, educational, living, and personal and social environments. Transition assessments are required by IDEA for students of transition age, very much in the same way that assessments are integral to the special education process for students who are younger. For students of all ages receiving special education services, good assessment is the engine that drives the IEP process. The IEP team must have data on the student's strengths and challenges in order to write IEP goals. In the same way, during the transition years, transition assessment provides information on the student's strengths, needs, preferences, and interests so that appropriate goals may be written and services provided. It's a good idea to cultivate a transition frame of mind. Think about all the ways your child is assessed routinely. For example, classroom observation, history exams, the MCAS. Think of all the things you know about your child just by living with them, or what your child's employer knows from their part-time job at the restaurant. If your child has had formal assessments conducted by a specially trained practitioner, you have that information too. You actually have a lot of existing data about your child. All of these assessments, when your son or daughter is age 14 or older, can be considered transition assessments. Try to use all of the sources of information you have about your child's strengths, needs, preferences, and interests. You may have more data than you think. Transition assessment is an individualized, question-driven process. The number and type of assessments which are appropriate to conduct for each student is determined by the number and type of questions about the student for which answers are needed. Experience demonstrates that the IEP team is likely to have many questions about a younger student for whom the transition process is just beginning. Indeed, it is developmentally appropriate for all students who are 14 or 15 with or without disabilities to have many questions about themselves. Students nearing graduation who have had appropriate transition planning since age 14 are likely to have a clear vision and well understood skills. Therefore, there will be fewer questions to address. The purpose of transition service delivery is to close the gap there's the gap again, between your child's current skills and the demands of your child's intended future environment. Transition assessment enables the IEP team to understand those gaps and to plan how best to lessen or eliminate them. So transition assessment answers these important questions. Who is the student? Who does the student want to be, or what does the student want to do? And what is the fit between the student and the requirements of the educational, employment, and living environments into which the student plans to move when he or she exits high school? Depending on your child's individual needs, examples of questions that can be addressed might include, if your child wants to go to college, does he or she have necessary academic, social, and functional skills? Or, given your child's vision for employment, what experiences and educational opportunities does he or she need now in order to be successful in that future occupation? Or how about if your child currently lacks skills necessary to fulfill a post-secondary goal of independent living, and the team determines this is an area of need, how is your child going to acquire those skills? If your child doesn't require an independent living or post-secondary goal on his or her IEP, does your child nonetheless require functional IEP goals, maybe involving assistive technology, that will support the development of skills in areas such as financial literacy, healthcare, or self-help? As teens develop, we expect that their post-secondary goals will change over time. As transition assessments and educational experiences in and beyond the classroom help them to clarify, refine, and communicate their vision and skills, and to better understand themselves and the demands of the future toward which they are working.
Okay, so if you look at this slide, there are multiple ways that assessment data can be collected, and it's important to remember that your child should be involved as much as possible in the planning, implementing, and evaluating the assessment process. According to their abilities, a student can be taught over time to assume increasing responsibility. So assessment data, as we said, can be collected across multiple settings and from a variety of people who know the student well, including the student, him or herself, employers, teachers, friends, coaches, adult agency personnel, etc. Transition assessment is an ongoing process done over time, not something that is done only once. Parents play a key role in assessment. If you think about this, the more students know, the more they can do. The more the student can do, the more opportunities they will have available to them. The students need to learn to anticipate and participate in the rhythms of life. Remember, families know about their child when they're with them, but not about their child when they're not with them, and educators know about their students when they're with them, but not when the students are not with them. Families and educators fill in each other's blanks. The IEP should contain annual goals and transition services that flow from the student's vision, needs, strengths, preferences, interests, and assessment results. Any reader of an IEP for a student aged 14 to 22 should be able to see a clear linkage between the student's post-secondary goals, transition assessments, annual IEP goals, and transition services. Before we wrap up, we want to mention some additional federal and state requirements. 2 years before the date you expect your child to exit school, and this could be age 16 for some students, it may be appropriate for your school to do a 688 referral. Chapter 688 is a state law that creates a process for reporting to adult agencies that students may need services when they're completing school. Students who have an IEP and receive SSI or SSDI or are on the registry at the Mass Commission for the Blind, or MCB, are automatically eligible for Chapter 688, for the referral to Chapter 688. Other students may be eligible, who might be eligible, are students with severe disabilities who are in need of continued services and are unable to work 20 or more hours per week in a competitive employment site at the times they are ready to leave school. Also, students who receive services from the Department of Youth Services, DYS, or the Department of Children and Families, that's DCF, and are on an IEP or a 504 plan may be eligible. It's important to understand that just because your child has been referred to an adult service agency, such as the Department of Developmental Services, or DDS, that doesn't mean that your child will actually receive services. 688 simply tells the agency that your child exists. Your child will then have to go through an agency eligibility process to determine if he or she is eligible to receive adult services, and then from that it will be decided if there are services available. Services from adult agency are dependent on available funding from the state legislature. When your child reaches age 17, your child's school should be discussing with you that your child will be a legal adult at age 18. When your son or daughter turns 18, he or she will be legally able to make all decisions for him or herself, regardless of the disability. If your child will need help managing his or her affairs, you might want to make sure that you investigate the possibility of various types of guardianship. So here are some things to think about as your child gets older. Right? Has disability disclosure been explored? And we mentioned this earlier, that the 411 on disability disclosure is a good website. So we know that research shows that students with disabilities who understand themselves, including their strengths and weaknesses, who can share this information with others, and who understand how to seek and obtain assistance will be the ones who achieve adult success. Also, students who are invested in involved in planning their own future are more likely to do well in college, become employed, and participate in the community. This slide lists some of the skills you'll want your child to have in order to be a successful adult, and we talked about them earlier. So your child will want to describe important laws and know their rights as a person with a disability. They'll want to be able to identify their needs, academic and social emotional, and his or her communication style. That's just to name a few. It's important for your child to be involved in their own planning. We also talked about the age of majority a couple slides ago. At age 18, your child will become a legal adult. We talked about the 688 referral, which should happen 2 years before your child will exit school. One final thing to think about is the summary of performance, which is required by IDEA. At the end of your child's time in school, your district should create this document, which is a summary of your child's academic achievement and functional performance, and which must include recommendations on how to assist your child to meet his or her post-secondary goals. This summary can be a useful tool for your child, who can be and should be involved in creating it as much as possible, and can help colleges, the College Disability Support Office, or an adult agency understand your child's needs and strengths.
So we've come to the end of our presentation, Martha, and I thank you for listening. On the screen, you'll see a few references we hope you find helpful, and we're happy to take questions.
Oh, thank you, Amanda and Martha, for a great webinar. We do have one question that was put in the chat box, and it's from Michael. With emotionally disabled young people, what if they don't have the ability to think of the future?
So, you know, the expression Rome wasn't built in a day. You know, transition doesn't happen in a day either. You know, this absolutely, this is a difficult situation. Disabilities are not easy. I'd suggest, and I think Martha would suggest too, it's a process that needs to happen over time, and in whatever way that's appropriate. You know, and the information that the person can take in at the time may be different one day from what the person can take in the next hour or the next day or the next month or the next year. So that's one thing, is that, you know, developmentally, just by growing up and through receiving services and supports, hopefully the student will develop the ability to think about the future more. I think, of course, students are receptive to hearing different messages from different people, too. So it's always important with all students to think, you know, who would be more effective at talking with a student about the future than maybe someone else would be. I don't know if you have other thoughts, Martha.
And I think that to let the child know that what information they can give you about how they're feeling that day, what type of environment is better to work in another, is the morning better, or the afternoon, or quiet, or I need a place that I can be off by myself. All of that is part of planning for the future. So it's not saying that I'm going to be working, you know, as we gave an example, in the hospital. It might be at that time what they can give you is just, I need a quiet place, or I like to be around a lot of people, or I like to work outdoors, that type of thing. So all of that, and supporting your child in knowing that that is being involved and that is part of planning. And I think it does happen over time. And we say start at 14, but in reality, for all of us, for most of our children, we start giving our kids more and more responsibility as they get older. And that starts when they're toddlers. And I think that, again, if we look at that as a long process, I think that's the way to look at it.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking at Joan. You had your hand raised, and I'm just wondering if you want to if you want to ask a question. I'd be happy to unmute you. While I'm waiting to hear from you, we also have another question. Are there funding sources to assist in providing comprehensive transition services and programs more than just completing a TPF?
So school districts in Massachusetts are funded through federal, state, and local funding. Transition planning is a federal and state law. And absolutely, the TPF is just the tip of the iceberg. It's just the start of the conversation. And I wouldn't consider the TPF actually a transition service per se. I'd say the TPF is is transition planning, the start of transition planning, because from the TPF, the IEP is developed. The IEP is where you'll be seeing, we're documenting what transition services will be happening. So is there funding? Yes, because there's funding to fund special education and general education. You know, our students receiving special education services can also receive wonderful services, of course, through general education, which is funded through those funds. You know, just because they're a student with disabilities, a student with an IEP, for example, doesn't mean that they need to be in a special employment program for special people. They could be in the regular internship program that's provided through general education and just receiving extra accommodations or supports. So I guess the answer is that it comes from, you know, federal, state, and local, and the same as all education funding.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? You can raise your hand, or you can just chat it in. Wait a minute or so. You know, I did chat in that everybody will be receiving a copy of this informative webinar and presentation. And also, we are recording this, so it will be available on demand. So if you wanted to, you know, just go over a couple of things, because I know it's a lot of information. I learn something every time I attend one of these. So. Well, I think that's it. I think unless anybody wants to chat in real quick, I don't see any other questions. And I want to thank all of you for attending this afternoon. It was a terrific webinar. Thank you to our presenters, Amanda Green and Martha Daigle. After this webinar, you are going to be redirected to the ARC of Massachusetts website. And there's a very brief, I promise, only 5-question survey. We'd love to get your feedback on what you thought about the webinar and and whether or not you have any other ideas. I heard Amanda and Martha talk about guardianship. I did want to note that on April 26th, we have attorney Fred Misilo from Fletcher and Tilton, and he is going to be doing a whole webinar for us on autonomy, supported decision-making, and guardianship. So there's a lot of new types of support available for people in lieu of guardianship, so it's going to be great to hear. So we did get one more question. What are acceptable age-appropriate transition assessments?
So I'm not going to, for example, say, use the XYZ test. That's an acceptable, appropriate one. I think the thing to do is, as I think one of our slides said, is to have a transition assessment frame of mind. Look around and see the sources of information that you have. Some of the information you have will come from formalized testing, which is the sort of test you'd be submitting an official request, a written request to your school district. It's going to be performed by someone with a formal certification, and that's very valuable. But a lot of the information, which is totally appropriate and incredibly useful, is interviewing your child, is looking at their school records, is observing them in the classroom and in environments in the community and in employment. Wherever you get information about a student when they're of transition age, you can consider that a transition assessment, and that's really valuable.
Right, and I'm just speaking as a former teacher of students with disabilities. As a teacher, we were assessing all the time, and so I could talk to families, and they knew how their children, what responsibilities their children could handle, what maybe they were having difficulty with in the school. I could talk about what areas they were doing well in, what time of day was a better time of day, did they need, as we had talked before, time to have some downtime, or were they always energetic, and all of this can be information, and that's informal assessment, and that happens all day, every day, that helps inform what types of support the child will need in obtaining their vision. So I would agree with Amanda that the formal assessments, that's very individualized to what you're looking for, what you need to know based on the child's vision, and then the informal assessments provide an awful lot of information.
I would also say, as we mentioned in our slides, we often get the question, how many transition assessments is the right amount? And the answer would be as many as you have questions for. So there's really not a point to giving every child the same assessments, because every child is an individual, and you know lots and lots of things about one child and not so much about another one. So what's the right amount of testing of transition assessment for students of transition age? It really depends on the questions you have about them in the different transition areas. So academically, in terms of education and training, in terms of employment and community participation and independent living.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you again, everybody. I haven't gotten any other questions, so I hope everybody has a great day, and thanks for attending.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.